For years, the world has heard one version of Jelly Roll's story. The version where a man who'd been arrested more than 40 times crawled out of a jail cell, found music, and became one of the biggest names in country. He's told it everywhere, on podcasts, at the Grammys, even in front of the United States Senate. It's a redemption story, so clean it almost feels scripted. But there was another version of that story, one nobody had heard until last year, because sitting in the background of Jelly Roll's redemption the whole time was a little girl, his daughter. And when she finally sat down and told her own version at 16 years old, it didn't just add to the story everyone knew. It quietly blew it open. Her name is Bailee Ann, and the truth she told changes everything you thought you understood about that family. On May 22nd, 2008, a 23-year-old man named Jason Bradley DeFord was sitting in a cell at the Davidson County Jail. Felony possession. It was one more stop in a life that had already seen over 40 arrests. That man would one day be known to the world as Jelly Roll. But on that day, he was just another inmate waiting out another sentence. And then a guard told him something that stopped him cold. His daughter had just been born. Jelly Roll calls it his Damascus Road moment. The biblical instant where Saul became Paul, where a man is struck blind and sees clearly for first time. He cried for first time in years. Because in that cell, in that moment, he understood something with terrifying clarity. He was now responsible for a child. Her name was Bailee Ann. Her mother was a woman named Felicia Beckwith. And the legal battle for that little girl would turn out to be far more complicated and far darker than the inspirational version of the story ever let on. Jelly Roll first met Bailee in person around her second birthday in 2010 after his release. And from the very beginning, the visits were rationed, limited, controlled, so he did the only thing he knew how to do. He kept showing up. Every 6 months, like clockwork, he went back to court, asking for expanded visitation, then partial custody, then full custody. He wasn't a star yet. The music wasn't even part of the picture. He was just a man trying to prove, one hearing at a time, that he had changed. And then, in 2015, everything in Bailee's other home began to collapse. Felicia was diagnosed with fibromyalgia and prescribed pain medication. What followed was a decade-long addiction that Jelly Roll would later document in his Hulu film, Save Me. The household Bailee was growing up inside was quietly falling apart. The public version of the story skips this part. Bailee's version never does. The most detailed account of those years didn't come from Jelly Roll. It came from Bailee herself. In February 2024, she sat down on her stepmother Bunnie XO's podcast, Dumb Blonde, for an episode called Bailee and Strength and Healing. And she did not soften a single detail. She said the decline started when she was in kindergarten. By first grade, in her own words, things were essentially gone. She described the condition of her childhood home with one word that still lands like a punch: horrendous. She said it still gave her nightmares, because she wasn't a child who witnessed addiction from a distance. She was a young girl raised inside of it, from the inside out, and all the while, her father was out there somewhere, building a music career out of a van, slowly, painfully, working his way toward the day he could bring her home. That's where Bunnie XO enters the story. In 2016, Jelly Roll met Elisa, the Las Vegas podcaster the world knows as Bunnie XO. They eloped in August of that year, and almost immediately, the two of them began pushing for full custody of Bailee. It was finalized in 2017. Jelly Roll has said it plainly on the Smartless podcast in March 2025. He could not have gotten custody without Bunnie XO. And on Bussin' with the Boys a year before, he revealed something even more striking. That Bunnie personally paid the legal fees during the custody fight, back before he had any real money from music. Bunnie doesn't call herself an adoptive mother. She calls herself a bonus mom. But she has been Bailee's full-time mother figure since the girl was 8. And Bailee, in return, calls her something even more telling: mom by choice. Here's the part that says the most about both of them. Despite Jelly Roll's chaotic touring stadium-sized career, they made one deliberate choice: to keep Bailee's life ordinary. Same public school district for 10 straight years. Stability over spectacle. A home that felt like a home, not a set. In 2020, when she was just 10 years old, Bailee wrote a song with her father. It was called Tears Could Talk. It went on his album, A Beautiful Disaster, and it was about Felicia. Jelly Roll was stunned. Not that a child could write, but that she understood her own situation so clearly, that she could put words to a pain most adults spend their whole lives running from. 3 years later, in July 2023, she performed that song in front of a stadium crowd on the Backroad Baptism Tour. The decision was entirely her own, but the summer before, something had happened that changed everything. At 14, Bailee chose to spend part of her summer with Felicia, who was supposedly in a sober period. The relapse happened during that visit, and Bailee has described, without flinching, what it meant. Her mother introduced her to marijuana, to alcohol, to other illegal substances. The breaking point came on the 4th of July. Felicia told Bailee they were stopping by her dealer first. In that single sentence, a 14-year-old girl understood that her mother's recovery was over. Bailee came home to Jelly Roll and Bunnie in crisis, carrying years of mental health struggles that had finally caught up to her. Her parents enrolled her in an 8-week residential wilderness therapy program. She voluntarily extended it to nearly 9 weeks. That detail matters, because it tells you whose decision the healing was. It was hers. And when she came home, she made the hardest choice a child can make. She cut Felicia out of her life entirely. On that same Dumb Blonde episode, a 15-year-old girl made a statement so raw it stopped the internet cold, without anger, without performance. She said that in her view, her mother was without a soul. That is not the sentence of a wounded child trying to hurt someone. It is the sentence of a young woman who has made peace with the truth and chosen to stand on the other side of it. The episode streamed millions of times, and in doing so, it exposed something the clickbait headlines never could. Not that Jelly Roll had failed, but that he was a parent who showed up. But here is where Bailee Ann's story refuses to be a footnote in her father's redemption. In November 2024, now 16, she returned to the podcast with plans, and they had nothing to do with music. She wants to attend Columbia University, study criminal defense law, and in her own words, turn the judicial system upside down from the inside. She's floated becoming a judge, a congresswoman, even president. This is not a daydream. She maintains one of the highest GPAs in her high school and is already dual enrolled in college courses. And she has been explicit about one thing. She has no interest in following her father into music. Songwriting was an outlet, not a path. Her instrument, she says, will be the courtroom. The little girl who grew up inside someone else's chaos has mapped out a future with the clarity of a person who has survived more than most. She is not the wounded child in a redemption story. She is the protagonist of her own. And what does a father see when he looks at her now? In a People magazine interview in November 2024, Jelly Roll described Bailee as emotionally intelligent, able to read a room better than most adults he knows. He credits that groundedness over and over to one thing, the ordinary stability they fought so hard to give her. But the most revealing moment came in front of the Senate. In January 2024, testifying about the fentanyl crisis, Jelly Roll referenced his daughter directly. He said he had a 15-year-old daughter whose mother was an addict, and that he feared she would become a statistic. He was not using her story for sympathy. He was holding it up as a warning, with the protectiveness of a father who knows exactly how close his own family came to the edge. And then there's a story he told on the Pivot podcast in March 2024 about Bailee seeing her mother's mugshot online after yet another arrest. His point was simple and devastating. In these situations, the family is a victim, not the addict. Every album Jelly Roll releases now carries the same names. In October 2024, his #1 album, Beautifully Broken, came out on Bailee and Bunnie management, a label named after both of his children, Bailee and his son Bunnie. Every record he puts out is, in a quiet way, a monument to them. Bailee has walked red carpets with her father, the Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Awards in July 2024, the CMA Awards at November. She's attended his concerts at Stagecoach. She went to her first prom in April 2025. And then came the moment that said more than any of it. In December 2025, Bailee organized a surprise, a prom under the stars for Jelly Roll and Bunnie, because she knew they had never gotten their own prom. the child who'd been given so little growing up turnaround, and gave her parents the childhood moment they'd missed. That's not a detail you invent. That's who she is. There are two versions of Jelly Roll's redemption story, the one he tells, and the one his daughter finally told. And here's the twist the clickbait never saw coming. Bailee Ann's testimony didn't expose her father as a failure. It exposed the truth about her biological mother. It revealed who had actually been there, the father who fought for custody for years, who stayed sober, who sent her therapy, who built her a stable life with a bonus mom who paid the legal bills before the money ever existed. Bailee didn't destroy anyone. She simply told the truth as she lived it, and let the rest of us decide who showed up. The 17-year-old who told that story is now headed toward Columbia, toward law school, toward a future mapped out with the clarity of a survivor. She told her own version of the story, and the truth she told was the opposite of what everyone expected. So tell me, what hit you hardest? The 4th of July phone call that ended a mother's recovery, the bonus mom who paid for the custody fight, or the surprise from a daughter gave her parents? Drop Bailee in the comments and tell me which one you never knew. I read every single one. Hit the like button if you think that girl deserved better than she got, and if you think she's going to change the world anyway. And subscribe. We tell the untold stories behind the names you thought you knew every single week. See you in the next one.